Are you Marty?
Yeah.
What brings you here?
I don't know. Phyllis made me come. My sister.
Oh. She must be very persuasive. Well, tell me about yourself. I run a fabrics company. So you're the boss. That feel good?
It feels... Phyllis has always been the strong one.
You're a grown man hiding behind a wall of curtains.
I think I can help you. The first thing I'm going to do is completely unethical. I'm going to give you a hug. No, I'm a hugger.
How did it could happen? How is it possible that Marty was manipulated for so many years by Dr. Reich? Did you ask yourself this question before thinking about the series?
Yeah.
It didn't seem so far-fetched. I mean, even before I listened to this podcast, it made me think of, oh, that happened to Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, didn't it? You know, his therapist moved in, took songwriting credits. I mean, really kind of took over his life. But I think that our brains are very easily manipulated. It's happening in the world right now with news and social media, like there's propaganda. And also these kinds of things don't, they happen over time. It's a gradual thing.
And in the case of Marty, and I think this is relatable as well, it was the right place at the right time. You know, he had never really tried therapy before, and it was, you have to remember, Ike really had great kind of concrete advice that really gave him confidence and helped him out, and that trust started to build, and then I'm sure, Marty enjoyed the results and how it made him feel, and it helped him, solve the situation with his ex-fiance, who still was promised a trip to Mexico, at least in her mind, and so I think it's a easier kind of dilemma than we think to fall into.
Will, you met the real Marty. How much does the meeting of the real protagonist of the story affect the way you have to play him on screen?
Well, I think it all kind of goes into the same, pot, if you will. Getting to meet Marty, getting to listen to his testimony on the podcast. There were home movies and videos we got to watch of some of the Hamptons parties, and I think it informed everything in terms of my performance and what I was going to try to create. Even though the character I created is not to the letter Marty. It's more of an amalgamation of all those things, but it was invaluable to get to kind of spend the day with him and listen firsthand to and get to see him in his environment and kind of listen to what happened.
Paul, for you, it was a little bit different because you had the fear elements about Dr. Reich. You only had the photos and his voice of the podcast, right? But I liked very much the way you worked on his type of movements, his posture. For example, on the first episode when he played basketball on the street, it was. I think it is a great work behind it. It's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a little. It's challenging when you don't get to meet the person and you're playing them, and you know that they really exist. And like Will said in his approach to Marty, at a certain point you have to kind of create a character, and it's the character that I've listened to on the podcast. I met Marty as well. I heard Joe Nacera, who did the podcast, their recollections, and at a certain point then you just kind of have to create what you can create. I knew what he looked like and I knew what he sounded like.
Where did you start from to prepare your character?
Well, the first thing was the podcast, which I had listened to before even seeing the script. The second was this gorgeous script that Georgia had written that was inspired by the podcast. And the third was actually being able to Zoom with Phyllis and hearing the events from her point of view, which she was incredibly I will be forever grateful with how open she was and vulnerable with her story. She is such a force of nature, and she's very, very funny and very open, the actual Phyllis. And then just putting myself, like I always do, try to imagine, which I had a really hard time doing at first, trying to find that well of forgiveness and that well of strength to be able to stick around for 30 years. I know that was difficult.
Casey, you play Bonnie, that is wife of Ike. Unlike Kathryn, you didn't have a great deal of information about her, apart from her podcast. What did you do to prepare her character? And for you, the same question, what is the aspect that you like most about her?
I think the aspect I kind of latched onto is her positivity, and I always think that's interesting, to play characters that are faced with things but remain positive. And so I tried to kind of go there. Georgia Pritchard, who wrote the scripts, wrote such a great character, but ultimately I thought it would be interesting, and so did Georgia, that she's kind of perhaps Ike's first kind of cult member in a way, and so she's just so into him, and then kind of see where that goes from there, so that when Marty enters the story, she's sort of both jealous, she recognizes it, she can empathize with him. There's a lot going on with her kind of in between the two men.
The last question is more general. We live in a very complex times in which manipulating is growing on social media and TV, also through fake news that they are slowing down, for example, the global vaccination in this terrible pandemic. Did you ever wonder why people are ready to believe on incredible surreal hypotheses and fascinated doctor, as in the series, without questioning so much?
I mean, I feel people are just looking to find meaning anywhere because it feels like so chaotic and things have felt so disconnected, yeah, and meaningless. And so I think that people look to find meaning somewhere or find connections somewhere. And so I feel like it's a really ripe time. Like we were talking about that before. Like if it's not an actual therapist, people find meaning online, like you were saying, in groups or in, everyone's trying to find meaning.
And I think to feel like you belong to something is appealing right now, that you belong in a community or a group, and to have that identity. And then, but if the person kind of leading the group is toxic, I think that it's very dangerous.
Well, that's exactly how I felt when I first heard the podcast, because it seemed so extraordinary. But then the more I thought about it, the more I felt it was something very relatable. And that, when we meet Marty, he's bereaved, he's struggling at work, his relationship's broken up. Those are the things every human being experiences. And then in the light of the pandemic, we all know how it feels to feel isolated and confused and scared. So it felt like a story that actually was universal, and this relationship, I feel I didn't want to condemn Ike or judge Ike or indeed judge Marty for being gullible or foolish. I wanted to understand how this happened between these two men, and not, I think, had it been, just to your very good point, had it just been a comedy, I didn't want to laugh at Marty or laugh at Ike. I felt it was important to feel the truth, to feel their pain, and to feel the emotion. And then that makes the comedy funnier, and it makes the tragedy sadder. So,
another great element to underline are the topics, the themes covered by this series. We are not only talking about manipulation of mind, but also other darker subjects, for example, the loss and the betrayal, for example. It must not have been easy to maintain this right balance, and in particular to embrace 27 years of history in just 8 episodes. How did you do that?
Well, I think, as you've seen, it looks incredible. It was a real team effort in terms of the sets, the costumes, the makeup, the hair. Everyone looks incredible, and it's a great way of tracking time. And I think relationship-wise, just to keep to be true to the characters and to try and understand them. And, you know, this was a tragedy really for both men. It's not like one won and one lost. You know, it's a very sad story, but I think it's a hopeful story because ultimately Marty finds inner strength, and the kind of the triumph of the human spirit is what wins.
In writing this series, have you wondered why people are ready to believe on incredible surreal hypotheses and fascinated the doctor without questioning, without making other questions?
I think that's a great question. You know, we started filming on the day that Biden was declared the winner of the American election and Trump was arguing with it. And I said to the cast, you've just been in an abusive relationship with your president for 4 years, so channel that into this show. And, you know, now, as you say, with the pandemic and with the vaccinations, I think people are scared. And then, like Marty, you end up believing or putting your faith in the wrong thing because you don't know where to turn.